Hi everyone, me again. I wanted to start off this episode by talking about the things that make my heart skip a beat. For me, it's about the spirit of the piece, if it talks to me. And typically, one of the first things that I look at is the overall aesthetic. And that can impact me by handwork, by the silhouette, by the print. And I found early on that the things that I responded to most were ethnic. So I have a true confession to make that because my business consumes so much time and so much attention, that I know women's 20th century things pretty well, but I don't know ethnic pieces. I don't know the periods that certain things are from. I don't know the definition of the status in the case of Chinese pieces. And so I'm admitting to my lack of knowledge in this area. But in many ways, it doesn't really matter because what I'm showing you are beautiful pieces that have the spirit of the creator infused in them. Later on, like in the 1970s, a lot of the Chinese pieces went commercial for the Western world. This fabulous lounging outfit is probably 70s. And I've had this for a while. I love it. It's comfortable. It's very airy. And it's typical in terms of the types of embroideries, the medallion, and some of the iconography with the flowers and the birds. But it's the quality of the embroidery isn't there. It's pretty, I guess you could call it mass-produced in a way, because you'll see later on the pieces that are from the early 20th century and how fine the embroidery is. If you go back to the early 20th century, there were moments in history like the Egyptian revival period when King Tut's tomb was discovered, and how a lot of Egyptian iconography and prints were part of fashion and jewelry. And then in 1912, I believe, Chinese became, they had a revolution and they became a republic. And from that point on, a lot of chinoiserie was infused in fashion. I mean, it has been pretty much throughout many centuries, but you'll see the Chinese fashions changing and becoming more Western, and the flip-flop of Western fashion, including Chinese motifs. We have an incredible example, which I'll show you after we go through a few of these pieces that are hanging. This robe, which I can't tell you how the embroidery takes my breath away, is filled with floral patterns that are satin stitched, and the ombre, which really gives it a 3D kind of effect. And you'll see the forbidden stitch interspersed between the petals. The borders are a dark color, which is great because it makes the robe itself pop. And the embroidery on the borders are multicolor, so it gives it a wonderful contrast. The front has the toggle closure, and it has a mandarin collar. It's a really tight collar. So this one I love in particular because I don't see a lot of pieces with this background color. So, and then this is a personal piece because purple is one of my favorite colors, and it's from the 1920s, and the embroidery isn't as fine as on this piece, which is early 20th century, but the design you can see has very kind of flapper coat, like a duster silhouette, and it has this fabulous dramatic sash that goes right over the shoulder. The embroidery on this is primarily flowers and birds, and what I love about the Chinese pieces, what little I know, is that they utilize symbols, iconography, things that are important and relevant to their history, and you can tell the status of a person with a lot of the earlier pieces. In the late 19th, early 20th century, these beautiful collars or shawls were created, and they're all fine embroidery, like super fine embroidery. This one has hand knotted kind of net with tassels on the end. The best, in my opinion, because I am a Pisces, is this short collar with two fish. And the face of the fish is finely embroidered. It's not a satin stitch, and also the scales. You'll also notice they use different techniques besides satin stitch. They use a technique called couching, which this is with a bullion thread, where they lay the thread down and then tack it, lay it down and tack it. There's one piece coming up that's solid couching. It's very time consuming, but really effective in outlining embroidery. In terms of status, social status, the Chinese used rank badges, and depending on the color of the rank badge and the image would tell you what their status was. This is the only rank badge I have, and I haven't done any research on who this person may have been. But you see, it has everything from, I believe this is a phoenix, to maybe lotus flowers, clouds, and waves. And if you look at the back, it's mind-blowing because you can see how tiny the stitches were in creating this pattern. You know, we talk about fashion being art, and I mean, clearly there's no way to argue with this. I also pulled, in addition to responding to clothing, which is obviously my primary business, I respond to textiles, and a lot of my home is covered with beautiful textiles from around the world, places that I've been to. And in these cases, I've never been to China, but I bought these pieces in auction, and this is all couched, and it's doubled up because it's such a big piece. But you can see the pattern is spectacular, and the lining is really wonderful too. And this to me is unusual because it has these mirrored pieces around the border, which is something that you see a lot in Gujarat, India, in their embroideries, but I've never had a piece from China that has that. So there's this piece, and then this embroidered piece, which is probably late 19th century. And what I love about this is the beaded border on the bottom continues a floral pattern. And if you look closely, a lot of the blue threads have disintegrated, but they've disintegrated in a way that it actually creates almost a ghost image where you can continue the pattern. It doesn't take away from the piece. I think it actually enhances the piece. But these flowers are very much a part of a lot of the Chinese pieces that you will see. A lot of Cantonese shawls, which are all hand embroidered, all hand knotted macrame on the fringe, were done in the 20s. People call these piano shawls, but you'll see very dramatic photographs from that time period of women posing with these shawls. This one's more different than ones that I've had in the past because the flowers are small. It's all over embroidered, and I can't even imagine how many hours were put into creating this. But it's in perfect condition, and I love the color scheme. Flowers and butterflies. And last but not least, I bought this piece many, many years ago. And at the time I was told that it was late 19th century, part of a fisherman's outfit. I don't know if that's true, but in doing my research last night, preparing for today, I actually found an excerpt where they talked about bamboo reed undergarments. Now, this jacket is completely made up of very thin bamboo reeds. And the article that I found in this book stated that it was worn as an undergarment to protect the outer garment from perspiration, and it allowed for more comfort for the wearer. And this was worn by men. I think this is a great idea to reintroduce into fashion today, to have kind of a liner that is a buffer to the outer garments. So last but not least, I want to pull this garment out because many of you are familiar with the Chinese cheongsam. It's traditional. Years ago, it was not as tailored to the body, but after the Chinese Revolution, there was like a liberation for women and an equality between men and women were freer. This one is fabulous, not only because it's my favorite color, but because it is made out of a cut silk velvet. And you can see the beautiful handwork of the frogs, which are the closures, silk bias cut piping around the neckline and the sleeves, and it's tailored to show the human form. In the 1920s, a lot of French designers were really influenced by Chinese patterns and design. You have pieces by Poiret, Calosur, and this is an example of a piece by Margaine Lacroix that was done probably around 1925 or 1926. It is done on this beautiful silver lame. It's solid silver lame, and we have we have a little fly that's enjoying it. And we have beautiful iridescent sequins, light blue, really pale blue, along with iridescent bugle beads and also cornflower blue seed beads. The patterns are pagodas, clouds, a lot of Chinese iconography throughout, front and. This piece to me is really a classic mid-20s piece because, well, the Chinese influence with the abbreviated kimono type sleeve. It has a wedge both front and back, which allows the wearer to not have it fall into food or drinks. It's actually a smart construction. But the way this is cut is the perfect silhouette to be worn with a flapper dress. So this clearly belonged to someone who had tremendous affluence. It's a beautiful piece. Unfortunately, it was stored for years hanging, so the shoulder area definitely needs conservation. But she's resting in this acid-free box and waiting for the right placement. If you're interested in beginning to collect vintage, depending on what your criteria is, if you want it to be wearable or just beautiful things that you surround yourself with, you can find things in various places. It's treasure hunting. Find things that talk to you, that make you smile. It starts with one thing and then it grows from there. For me, it was a ring that was an Art Deco ring, and I can't believe here we are, you know, almost 50 years later, and look at what that impact had on me. So that's it for now. We do have a few references that we'll be attaching to the end of this video, but I'm gonna get ready to show you the show off for this week. So stay tuned, hang in there. Bye for now. This week's show off is a piece that I acquired about 2.5, 3 years ago from a large collection that I bought over many months, I think 18 months, where I would purchase these things. This wonderful woman in Costa Mesa had a large collection of never been worn pieces. She'd had a store and she'd been warehousing these things. And some of the pieces were, you know, just basic sweatshirts, and a lot of the pieces were really fabulous things like Issey Miyake and Comme des Garçons. Anyway, there was this bag, and the bag was kind of misleading because the bag has a Marni tag on it. And in my lifetime, I never thought I would get a piece like this because I've seen them in museums. If you're familiar with Issey Miyake, in the 90s, I believe, he started to do research on creating a garment from one piece of cloth, literally weaving and creating the fabric so that all you had to do was cut it and you would create a garment. And he called it APOC, which stands for a piece of cloth. It's also kind of a take on the word epic. So I acquired this APOC Alien. It was done in 1999, and that piece of paper I just put down is actually the instruction sheet. So let's take this Alien out of the bag. It's actually a pretty big piece, and it has separate sleeves. Oops, I dropped one. Or leggings. But let's take a look and see what this thing looks like. So we have, you see how the knitwear is open weave, which is pretty wonderful. This is the coat, and attached to it is the dress. And I think for all the APOCs I've seen in my book, this is probably the least complicated in terms of cutting, but I see the cut line is right dead center here. So I don't intend to cut it because I think this is something that really is worthy of going to a museum so that people can get inspired and think outside the boundary. That was one thing that Miyake says in this book, that if people have preconceived notions, it limits their imagination to go beyond what currently exists. And for those of you interested, there is a book on APOC making, and I got to tell you, it's pretty unbelievable to see the different styles. Oops, the different styles of APOC that Miyake created. So mind-blowing, really. Modern technology and fashion can be a good thing. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.